Hello, good evening, and welcome to this episode of The Last Clue Story. I hope your entire family is doing well and looking after one another. Just this past Tuesday, a court in Britain delivered a historic verdict. For the first time in British legal history, the country's longest-running unsolved case has finally been solved, a case that had remained a mystery for decades. This unprecedented breakthrough marks the first time such an old unresolved case has reached closure. This Tuesday, a British court delivered a verdict in a long-standing rape and murder case, sentencing the accused to life imprisonment. While announcing the punishment, the judge stated that although the official sentence is 20 years, he is certain the convict will never leave prison alive. The weight of this statement reflected the gravity of the crime and the court's belief that justice, even if delayed, must be absolute. Normally, someone sentenced to 20 years could still walk free one day. But in this case, the situation is different. The man who received the sentence is already 92 years old. Given his current age, 20-year prison term would mean he'd only be eligible for release at around 112. While there are rare cases of people living that long, the chances are extremely slim. That's why the judge remarked that he's unlikely to ever leave prison alive. Now the real question arises, why was a 92-year-old man sentenced to 20 years in prison, and who exactly is he? The man in question is Hadley, and this entire story traces back nearly 6 decades. At 92 years old today, Hadley is at the center of a case that dates back 58 years. Despite countless efforts, the British police failed to crack the case for more than half a century. But now, after all these years, they finally managed to uncover the truth. The man who committed the brutal rape and murder had evaded justice for decades, hiding in plain sight all along. The shocking part is that the man responsible for the rape and murder lived just 200 miles from the crime scene for 58 years, undetected. This is the story of Hadley, and also the story of Louisa Dunn. Louisa was a 75-year-old woman at the time, someone who had already endured great personal loss. She had been widowed twice in her life. Her first husband, Parker Edwin, a local counselor, died back in the 1940s. After his passing, Louisa eventually remarried, hoping to rebuild her life. But tragedy was not done with her yet. Her second husband was John Dunn, but that marriage too was short-lived. In 1960, John passed away, leaving Louisa alone once again. Although she had 2 children from her first marriage, they lived far away and had little contact with her. She lived a quiet life, financially stable, spending most of her time at home. The events we're about to uncover take us back to the year 1967, specifically the 28th of June, a day that would forever change everything. Louisa was known to be kind-hearted and well-liked by her neighbors. Despite her age, she remained active and handled all her chores on her own. She was friendly, always engaging in pleasant conversations with those around her. However, she did have one weakness: she drank heavily, habit that concerned some. Still, no one ever imagined anything could go wrong. But on the morning of 28 June 1967, something unusual caught the attention of her neighbors. The day's newspaper was still lying untouched at Louisa Dunn's doorstep, something completely out of character for her. Normally, Louisa would wake up early and bring the newspaper inside, but that morning it remained untouched at her doorstep, with the door locked from the inside. This unusual sight raised concern among the neighbors, as such a thing had never happened before, especially considering Louisa was 75 and followed a strict routine. As they began discussing the situation among themselves, one neighbor spoke up, saying they had heard a scream coming from Louisa Dunn's house the previous night. That revelation left everyone deeply worried. Concerned neighbors approached the house, but the door was locked. They immediately called the police. When officers arrived and forced the door open, they were met with a horrifying scene. Louisa Dunn was found dead in her bedroom. She had been strangled. Her clothes were damp, and at first glance, authorities suspected it might have been a robbery gone wrong. Given her age, 75, and the condition in which her body and clothing were found, it became painfully clear that she had also been sexually assaulted. But the question that puzzled everyone was, why would anyone sexually assault a 75-year-old woman? Still, the police followed procedure and sent Louisa's body for post-mortem. Meanwhile, the neighbors began questioning what evidence had been found inside the house. It's important to remember this was 1967, a time when forensic technology was far from what it is today. Despite combing through the scene thoroughly, the police managed to recover only a single clue. The only evidence the police found was a single right-hand fingerprint on a drinking glass. They collected the glass as crucial evidence and waited for the post-mortem report. When the report arrived, it confirmed their worst fears. Louisa Dunn had been raped before she was murdered. The news quickly made headlines, and the horrifying reality of a 75-year-old woman being sexually assaulted and killed shook the conscience of the entire community. It was a crime that stunned even the most hardened officers and left society in disbelief. Now the police were under immense pressure to solve the case. With only one solid lead, a right-hand fingerprint found on a glass, they launched a massive investigation. Officers began collecting fingerprints from every male between the ages of 15 and 60 within a 2.2-kilometer radius of Louisa Dunn's home. It was an enormous task. In that area alone, 19,000 men fit the criteria. One by one, their fingerprints were taken and compared to the one found at the crime scene, in hopes of finding a match and bringing the perpetrator to justice. As time went on, the case slowly grew cold. Despite all efforts, the police couldn't identify Louisa Dunn's rapist or murderer. All the evidence, including the disordered items from her home and the skirt found at the scene, was carefully preserved at the police station. From 1967 to 1977, a full decade passed without any breakthrough. But then something chilling happened. Just 50 miles from where Louisa once lived, two elderly women, aged 79 and 84, were raped. Both attacks took place in the same area, though outside the jurisdiction where Louisa's case had been investigated. The similarities were alarming and raised serious questions about a possible link. During the renewed investigation, the police finally tracked down a suspect and took him into custody. His name was Hadley. His fingerprints matched those found at multiple crime scenes, including the one from Louisa Dunn's home. With this crucial evidence, Hadley was arrested and brought before the court. The court found him guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. However, in an attempt to overturn the ruling, Hadley's lawyer challenged the court's decision, launching an appeal. His lawyer argued that Hadley was mentally unstable and that his actions stemmed from deep emotional issues, including a lack of intimacy in his marriage. On these grounds, he pleaded for leniency, citing Hadley's fragile mental state. The court took this into consideration and, surprisingly, overturned the initial ruling. Instead of life imprisonment, Hadley was resentenced to 20 years, but ultimately served only 2 years. In 1979, he walked free after receiving what many believed was an incredibly light punishment for such a horrific crime. Despite being involved in the rape of 2 elderly women, Hadley was released after serving just 2 years. He returned to his home and resumed a quiet life, as if nothing had happened. Time moved on, and the investigation into Louisa Dunn's rape and murder remained stagnant. When the crime occurred, Hadley had been just 34 years old. Over the years, he aged, and the case slowly faded from public memory. But 58 years later, the case resurfaced in Bristol. The Bristol police, known for their vigilance in re-examining cold cases, took a fresh look at the forgotten files, determined not to let justice slip away forever. The Bristol police maintained detailed archives of cases even 40 to 50 years old, including all related evidence and documents. Among these was the file on Louisa Dunn's case. Despite 58 years having passed with no one held accountable, the file was still intact. Detectives, officers, and forensic experts decided to reopen the investigation. They requested the old evidence box containing all original materials from the case. Inside it were Louisa's skirt, the drinking glass with a fingerprint, and several other crucial items. Everything was brought out once again, this time with the hope that modern science could finally uncover the truth. Following that, the police ordered a re-examination of the skirt using advanced forensic techniques. DNA testing and other modern analyses were carried out. Though the crime had occurred 58 years earlier, it was now 2023, and science had come a long way. Investigators reopened the case with renewed focus. Special attention was given to the skirt worn by Louisa Dunn during the assault. Based on how it was found at the scene, along with details from the original medical report, forensic experts managed to extract trace DNA from the fabric. That DNA sample was immediately submitted for testing, offering a potential breakthrough in a case long thought unsolvable. After 58 years, police discovered not only DNA, but also fingerprints on Louisa Dunn's skirt. The evidence was sent to forensic experts for deeper analysis. During testing, they identified two distinct DNA profiles in the semen, one belonging to Louisa Dunn and the other to an unidentified individual. Investigators then began working on creating a DNA profile for the second person. As soon as this process began and the results were entered into the national database, what they found left the entire department stunned. The DNA profile retrieved from the skirt was remarkably well preserved. Using that profile, investigators ran a search through the national DNA database. After extensive cross-checking, they found a match. One individual's DNA aligned perfectly with the semen sample found on Louisa Dunn's skirt. When authorities traced the identity linked to that profile, they discovered the name, Raylan Hadley. However, in a case this old, spanning 58 years, a DNA match alone wasn't enough. Investigators needed more concrete evidence to build a watertight case. Now the police needed to prove that on 28 June 1967, Raylan Hadley was actually present in the area where Louisa Dunn was raped and murdered. To establish this, they dug through all the records and evidence from that time. By a stroke of luck, they uncovered documents that confirmed Hadley's presence in that location during 1967. That was one piece of the puzzle. The second was already in place, the DNA match. Then, when investigators reviewed his criminal history, they discovered a third crucial link. 10 years after Louisa's murder, Hadley had been arrested in connection with the rape of two elderly women, aged 79 and 84. This further strengthened the case against him. Raylan Hadley had previously been sentenced to life imprisonment, but his lawyer managed to secure a much lighter sentence by claiming mental illness, leading to his release after just 2 years. This clearly indicated that he was a repeat offender, a pattern that now worked in favor of reopening Louisa Dunn's case. With a DNA match, proof of his presence in 1967, and his criminal history, everything began to align. Finally, armed with all this evidence, the Bristol police arrived at Raylan Hadley's doorstep, ready to confront a man who had escaped justice for nearly 6 decades. At the age of 34, Raylan Hadley had raped and murdered Louisa Dunn, and now, at 92, he had spent 58 years living a quiet, undisturbed life. But that peace ended the day the police came knocking. They confirmed his identity and took him in for questioning. Initially, Hadley denied everything, but when confronted with the DNA evidence and other forensic details, he was visibly shaken. He couldn't believe that after nearly 6 decades, the police had managed to recover and match evidence from so long ago. The past had finally caught up with him. To ensure a strong case in court, the police needed more than just DNA. They had to build an airtight argument. During their review, they found that back when Louisa Dunn was raped and murdered, a right-hand palm print had been discovered on the window glass of her house. At the time, such fingerprint evidence was commonly collected. According to records from that era, authorities had taken fingerprint samples from 19,000 men between the ages of 15 and 60 within a 2.2-kilometer radius. Yet even with that massive effort, Hadley had managed to evade detection until now. Back then, Rayland Hadley was 34 years old, well within the age range of those whose fingerprints were being collected. So naturally the question arose, if all samples within that range were taken, why wasn't his fingerprint matched at the time? Upon reinvestigation, it was discovered that Hadley had narrowly escaped scrutiny simply because he lived just 0.2 kilometers outside the 2.2-kilometer search radius. Based on jurisdictional boundaries, the police had decided to collect fingerprint samples only from males aged 15 to 60 residing within that specific area, leaving Hadley just beyond their reach. As it turned out, Rayland Hadley had been living just 2.4 kilometers away, only 0.2 kilometer beyond the original search boundary. That small difference had allowed him to slip through the cracks. But now that he was finally in custody, the picture became clear. Remarkably, the police had preserved the original fingerprints from the glass and the palm print found at the scene. To confirm whether the old palm print belonged to Hadley, investigators asked him to provide a fresh sample of his palm print for comparison. Hadley initially refused to provide his palm print, claiming he had an allergy, a response that only deepened the police's suspicion. Nevertheless, the officers managed to obtain his palm print. Once they had it, they compared it with a preserved print from the 1967 glass, and the match was undeniable. With this final piece of evidence, the case was airtight. The police presented everything before the Bristol court. A full hearing was conducted, and on 1st July, the court found Rayland Hadley guilty. Soon after, the final verdict and sentence were announced. During the sentencing, Hadley's lawyer appealed for leniency, citing his advanced age of 92 and questioning how much longer he might even live. However, the court recalled the 1977 verdict, when Hadley had originally been sentenced to life imprisonment, but was released just 2 years later after pleading mental instability. The judge noted that if he hadn't been released back then, many of his later crimes, including multiple rapes and even thefts in at least 10 homes, might never have occurred. His past decisions had already cost others dearly, and the court was not willing to repeat the same mistake. When all the evidence was laid out, the police also charged Rayland Hadley with involvement in 10 house thefts. Faced with overwhelming proof, Hadley finally confessed. He admitted that he was deeply frustrated with his wife at home and didn't know how to cope with his anger. In his own words, elderly women became his easiest targets. He revealed that he always chose victims from the neighborhoods where he lived because he was familiar with the area, the streets, the routines, and which homes had elderly women living alone. This disturbing confession painted a clear picture of a man who preyed on the vulnerable with calculated intent. He admitted that he would visit those homes to unleash his anger, and if he found anything valuable, he would steal it too. That's when he learned about Louisa Dunn. He had heard that she was a heavy drinker. He assumed that once drunk, she wouldn't be fully conscious and wouldn't resist. With that in mind, he entered her home on June 28, 1967. But when Louisa resisted, he assaulted her brutally and ultimately killed her. With all the evidence stacked against him, the court finally sentenced Rayland Hadley to 20 years of imprisonment. And with those words, the judge declared a 20-year sentence. Honestly, no one expects him to survive that long in prison, and chances are he won't. In the long legacy of British law enforcement, this stands as one of the most cold cases ever cracked. a mystery that remained buried for nearly 6 decades before finally being solved. So that's all for today's story. If today's story gave you chills, then believe me, this is just the beginning. The Last Clue brings you true stories every week, real, disturbing, and drawn straight from the darkest corners of the human mind. If you're someone who's fascinated by true crime, psychological thrillers, political secret operation, celebrity life, world history, unsolved mysteries, and all of Verity's stories, then hit that subscribe button right now. Because the next story might be the one that keeps you up at night. Subscribe because the truth won't wait. I'll return next time with another gripping and unforgettable tale. We will meet you on Monday evening at 6 o'clock Indian time with a new story. It's a different story. Till then, take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you very much.